Meshach and Abednego in the fiery furnace. That joke makes a lot more sense than the other one. We are studying, thanks. It's all in the delivery, guys. It's all in the delivery. And mine was flawless. Yeah. In honor of that, we are doing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a fiery furnace. All right, so let's get everybody caught up to speed. We are studying the book of Daniel. This is, in terms of the history of the world, and certainly in the terms of biblical history, this is a time we're going to go past Adam and Eve, because almost everything is, past Abraham, past Isaac, Jacob, past Moses. We're going to keep on going past Moses through the time of the Judges. We're going to go past the time of the Judges, where Israel is settling into the Promised Land, into the time of the kings. We got David, we got Saul, we got David, we got Solomon. After that, the kingdom fractures into two parts, north and south. And they don't come back together. Half the kingdom gets conquered and taken off into exile, and then later on the second half gets conquered and taken off into exile. And that is where we find ourselves in history for this book. So Israel is splintered and displaced and, demoralized. They'd been through the Exodus, They'd had the great kings and queens of the earth coming to seek the counsel and pay homage to King Solomon. And now these days, they're just a conquered people without even access to the holy city of Jerusalem or the temple. At a time like this, you could easily imagine people feeling as if God wasn't listening anymore, as if God had turned his back on them. You can imagine that. And it would be an easy time to give up on the faith, The book of Daniel, especially these first several chapters, they really follow in the life of four exceptional young men. You have Daniel, then you have Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. Some of you who have been here week after week, you're learning those Hebrew names. I'm just telling you, when you get to heaven, you're going to want to look them in the eye and say, Hananiah, it's really nice to see you.
Well, that's going to be a real gift, because I don't remember anybody's name.
And Pastor Mike, it's really nice to see you. I have the same problem, truthfully. I feel kind of bad sometimes, because new people show up, and they come a few times, and I've already asked their name 2 times or 3 times, but my brain is mush on Sundays anyways, and as you well know. And, and it's like, can you remind me of your name one more time? I'm so sorry. But you all get to cheat, because you can just call me pastor, and then you're off the hook. You can just call me by a title. Yeah, name tags are really helpful. That's true. All right, so let's get back to our text here and stop talking about my insecurities. So, the beginning of the book, Nebuchadnezzar, who is basically the emperor of the world superpower of the day, he is. If you think about what Alexander the Great will wind up being, or what the Caesars will be in terms of conquering the world, he's one of those kind of guys. It's just this is a few kingdoms earlier. It's his kingdom that'll be conquered by Xerxes, right? And the Persians. It's the Persians who will be conquered by the Greeks. It's the Greeks who will be conquered by the Romans. And it's the Romans who will be conquered by, it depends on how you interpret it, either Jesus or the barbarians. Maybe both, right? All right, so that's where we are in history. Nebuchadnezzar has been conquering all these various peoples, displacing them from their homes to break their will, and also to assimilate them into his culture. And I do mean assimilate, because what he also does is he picks up from amongst them people of high promise, people of high talent and skill. right? So he has recruiters go out and find all the bright young men from every conquered people and brings them into his court. And they get training there, they get fed there, and they get made part of his cabinet, right? Part of his advisors. Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah, they are all part of that program of recruitment. And in the first chapter, we get those 4 men abstaining from the wine and the meat that's being brought in from the king's table. Now, of course, it's a high honor to be fed like that, and to be fed like that consistently in the ancient world. I will tell you this. In the ancient world, there was no what would you call this? There was no society-wide problem of obesity. It was the other way, right? In most of the history of mankind, people are just trying to get themselves fed each day. And the people who don't have to worry about that, those are the rich people, right? So keep that in mind. For them to turn away food, that's pretty significant, right? But they weren't going to eat it because, well, these were the wine, the meat, these would have been things sacrificed to the pagan idols that, that Nebuchadnezzar had elevated in his court. So instead of that, they just had simple vegetables and water, and they've thrived. And also, in the process, wound up getting everybody else in the academy on the same diet, which could not have made them popular. And I say that because that's foreshadowing. I mean, like it's really coming down the pipe. So the next thing that happens is Nebuchadnezzar has a really disturbing dream, but he's canny and a little bit paranoid. And so he doesn't want anybody to interpret his dream unless they can peer into his mind and know what dream he had without him telling them. He's looking for somebody with some supernatural authority, somebody who can peer into the minds and hearts of men. Because most people, when you're a powerful emperor who's conquering the world, they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, right? Y'all are familiar with the colloquialism, don't shoot the messenger, right? Where does that come from? Where does that idea come from? Describe to me a plausible scenario.
Bring bad news to the king and he's upset with it, so he kills the guy.
Yeah. So the messenger brings bad news. It's not his news. He's just the messenger. King doesn't like it, so he kills the guy, right? This kind of thing happened, right? How dare you say that to me, right? So, of course, people are afraid to give bad news to the king in whatever time period we're talking about. Or you can even pitch this forward into modern day celebrity type people, the really rich people, the really famous people. They tend to be surrounded by folks who don't give it to them straight. They tend to be surrounded by people who just tell them things they want to hear, right? Well, Nebuchadnezzar is at least savvy enough to know that that's a phenomenon, right? He doesn't want somebody to just tell him what he wants to hear. He wants to know the truth of this disturbing dream. Daniel volunteers himself to do this task, and then he goes and prays about it, right, after the fact. And then God does, in fact, give him knowledge of the dream and the interpretation. He comes before Nebuchadnezzar and says, King, may you live forever. Good on you. What you asked us to do is impossible. I cannot tell you what dream you dreamed. But the God whom I serve, he knows everything. And he can do this. And so let me tell you your dream. So Daniel goes to great pains to illustrate that it's not by his own power or his own wisdom that he does these things. It's strictly because of the God he serves. This is important. He tells Nebuchadnezzar about the dream that he had with the great statue made of mixed materials. At the top is the golden head. That represented Nebuchadnezzar. Silver, bronze, iron mixed with clay as you descend, right? And he says, well, those are the kingdoms that are coming, right? Which we can easily identify as the Nebuchadnezzar, after that the Persians, and after that the Greeks, and after that the Romans. This is all, it all tracks with the, it's fine. And then the divided the divided empire in Rome when the children of Caesar couldn't get along, and it's divided up. And guess what? It is then broken and destroyed. So this is a giant statue. There's a big boulder that rolls down off the mountain, this rock that is not cleft by any human hands. It rolls down, strikes the feet of clay, the whole thing collapses. The message here is that, and then it becomes a mountain, right? It becomes a place that stands forever. And the message here that Daniel's trying to convey is, you are great because God put you in this great place, but all kingdoms will fall except the one established by God. A rock not cleft by human hands, human intention, right? Just a divinely appointed rock is coming, and it will crush the kingdoms of man, and it will establish an eternal kingdom. We all know that this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, is about whom? Jesus. Nebuchadnezzar is a messianic prophet. Who saw that coming? Yeah, but it's true. Right? Because remember, the power is not in the prophet. The power is in the one who gives the message. Right? The power is in God. So anyways, he gets this messianic prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar's like, wow, that's amazing. You're amazing. I'm going to put you in high position. Right? So he becomes tight with Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, I've got these 3 friends. I would ask as a personal favor if you would put them in a high position too. Put them over Babylon. And he does. Well, you can imagine that people are getting envious of these guys. So Nebuchadnezzar, learning all the wrong lessons from the dream and the vision, right? Not learning about humbling himself, but rather kind of fixates on the parts he wants to hear, as powerful people often do. He fixates on the golden head and says, you know what? I got a solution to this problem. We'll just make the whole statue out of gold. Solid. Fine. Clearly, he's not an engineer. Gold's not a great building material, Anyway, so he makes this giant golden statue of himself. What did it say? 60 cubits? Is that right? So 90 feet? Yeah, I think that's right. I'll let you look it up. I'm going to keep riffing. So he makes this giant statue of himself, and then he wants to have a ribbon cutting ceremony, right? He wants to have a grand opening for this statue he built to himself. And so they invite all the VIPs, right? All the satraps and advisors and all that kind of stuff. Brings them all into his court. Once they arrive there, and so that would have included people like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? When they arrive there, then the message goes out. Now that great, so glad you're here. Now, when you hear the band go nuts, that's your cue to bow down and worship this idol. And if you don't, well, we're going to throw you into a fiery furnace. You can imagine why that was not on the invitation, right? They waited until everybody was there in the walls, probably surrounded by the army and all the henchmen who will do the dirty deeds. And then he says, yeah, now that you're here, we're all going to worship this statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they decide they're going to make a public and very noisy protest about this, right? They go picket at the council, at the castle with their placards and yell, scream, start a riot. No? What do? Yeah, they simply refuse to bow down. They don't make a stink. They just say, that's not us. We're not going to do that. So those Chaldeans and enchanters and all those people who are jealous of these 3 Hebrew men, probably 4. They're probably jealous of Daniel too, but Daniel's pretty tight with Nebuchadnezzar right now. So I think they probably swing clear of this because they don't want to sound suspicious to Nebuchadnezzar. Because he knows Daniel's great, but he doesn't know these guys so well. So they rat him out. They're like, hey, you know that decree that people have to worship when the band has the breakdown, right? These 3 guys, they don't do it. Can you believe it? And Nebuchadnezzar's like, well, we'll go get him, you know? And he gives him an ultimatum. He's like, okay, look, maybe you didn't, maybe you missed orientation, right? This band's about to play. When all the instruments play, you're going to bow down to me with the statue. And if you don't, we're going to throw you in the fire. And the response from these three men is, it's incredible. They say, no, we won't. We won't bow down. The God whom we serve can rescue us from the fire. But even if he doesn't, we still won't bow down to you. Had they received a special word from God saying, be strong and courageous, I will not let harm come to you? They did not receive a word like that. They had no promise from God that he would spare them from the flames of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, this is important. I want you to grab hold of this in a serious way because, there are a lot of voices in our culture today and in the church, and it's doing damage to the church, who would like you to believe that God will preserve you from every consequence of being a Christian. That if you are a Christian, you will be wealthy and healthy and comfortable, and people will like you, and your family will be happy and rich. Any of those things can happen. They're not promised by God here and now. Right? These three guys, they get that. But they would rather spend whatever time it takes in the flames of Nebuchadnezzar than turn their back on God. There was something I wanted to highlight. I haven't highlighted it yet, but I do want to highlight it today. Because this is where we left off last time. We left off at verse 18, right? So, Nebuchadnezzar, nowhere in here, denies the reality of their God. In fact, that would be foolish. He's kind of had some firsthand experience with him. Firsthand, because God gave a message to him. So that would be foolish. In the ancient world, and this is somewhat true today, but in the ancient world in particular, polytheism was the main way of thinking. Most people thought that there were many gods, that the many gods were real, but they wanted to serve the biggest and baddest, right? So when you see conflicts throughout the Bible, oftentimes that's a struggle from the perspective of the people on earth. That's a struggle between two gods to see which one is more powerful. And then you serve that one, because if you've got that guy in your corner, you don't have to worry about the other one, right? Fear the Lord, don't fear the other gods. Now we understand that there is one God. And if you're going to worship God, it's a choice. You worship this God to the exclusion of all the other potential gods there could be. We have a jealous God who will not allow you to worship anybody else. He does that because he cares about life and death. He cares about truth, right? He knows that everything else is a lie and it will destroy you. But Nebuchadnezzar doesn't live in that frame of mind, right? Chances are really good he believes that you can worship the God of Daniel and him and whatever other gods. He does not command them to stop worshiping his God, or to stop worshiping their God. He simply says, I just need you to worship this one too. So I think that's worth noting, right? Because this isn't even really about a restriction on their religious freedom, so to speak. Probably as a guy who's conquering the world, he is giving some latitude for people to keep their privately held beliefs, but they need to make this public confession of worship to him. But that's too much. For these Hebrews who know, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is alone. The Lord is one, right? Central to their faith, there is one God. They will not bow down, which is probably really galling to Nebuchadnezzar in a deep way, because to him it seems like no big deal. It's like, well, just do the thing. I'm not telling you to stop praying to your God. I'm just saying, do the thing. I'm the boss. Do the thing. But they don't do the thing. So they say, "Oh, king, I'm going to back up and just reread 16, and then we'll go forward from there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Verse 19, we're moving forward. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's pause there for just a brief moment. Just a brief moment. Remember, this guy is king of the world from his perspective. And he's taken the time to pull these guys aside and try to be reasonable with them. For him, he's seeing this as being a pretty gracious gesture, okay? And just to be refused like that. I say this stuff because oftentimes when we read these Bible stories, we see caricatures, right? Or maybe VeggieTales of these characters, right? But these are real people. And I want to help you picture the real person behind the thing, you know? Anyway, so he's taken time out of his busy day, and he is, in a sense, lowering himself down to have a talk with these men in a rational, reasonable way. And they say no, and so, of course, he's angry, right? His expression was changed, right? First, he's trying to be reasonable. They won't be reasonable. So now he's frustrated and angry, right? He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments. And they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace was overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the burning fiery furnace. This is probably some creeping madness coming in, right? Like Nebuchadnezzar saying, just make it like 7 times hotter. If you have a physics bent, you're probably going like, what does that even mean, 7 times hotter? Like, are we measuring in Celsius or Fahrenheit? Like, 60 to, well, whatever. There's problems with 7 times hotter, okay? But the point is, he's being pretty extreme. And it must be really hot, right? So they wrap them up in their full clothes. And the skeptics among us might think that, well, maybe that's the in this story. Maybe their clothes are like somehow protective of them. First off, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, like, if they had Nomex or whatever, like, fine, but that's still not how that stuff works. Because the guys who took them up to the furnace die. Probably not by burns, but probably by, just the heat, right? Or lack of oxygen or whatever. Like, they themselves don't jump into the furnace, but just getting so close to it is enough to kill them. Which is remarkable. And it's also a testament to say, there's also no illusion going on here. It's not like there's an optical illusion of a fiery furnace or something like, no, these guys die. inadvertently at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. And there's embedded in this a little bit of a metaphor, probably. Nebuchadnezzar's resistance to the God of Daniel, as being expressed here in this little scene. Nebuchadnezzar's idolatrous pride of himself, demanding people worship an image of him. I know we're anticipating a little bit, but you know the story. Does all the fury he can muster, does that do any damage to God and his people? But it does damage his own kingdom. It's his guards who die when the Israelites do not. All right, so they're bound hand and foot and tossed into the fiery furnace. They're bound, right? This is important. Verse 24. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. There's a neat storytelling device going on here. You'll see it here in a second. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." I want to pause on this real quick because I just want to talk about this from a literary standpoint. So often when we read ancient texts, some of those like little nuances that hold back the suspense, or like sometimes things feel like they get a little bit over-explained. You know what I mean? And the way that it delivers this here is just so great, because it's like Nebuchadnezzar got up and he was freaked out. Why? Maybe because the guards died? No, he didn't care about that. He runs and he looks and he saw in the fire. What did he see? Well, he expected to see 3 men. And so far the reader, who hasn't read the story before, is like, okay, but what does he see? Because he doesn't see that. And then there's the reveal. Oh, there's not 3 men, but 4. Oh, they're not bound. They're walking around freely. Remember, the guards getting close enough to the fire just fall over dead. And these men are walking around casually in the fire. I don't know why. I don't know why they're walking around. Like, I'm not a pacing kind of person, but you know. And then there's this 4th one, and he looks different. Who is it? What is that? I'm asking. Who's there in the fire? What do you think, Don? Who's in the fire with them? Jesus. Could be. It's a strong theory. What? Angel. An angel. Might be. The writer doesn't really tell us for sure. Also, just as a little facet of the Old Testament, the word that we translate angel, malach. Is it Melech or Malach? Shoot, one is king, one is messenger, and I'm getting them mixed up now. Take my word for it. The word that we translate as angel, it means messenger. And the same thing we do the same thing in the Greek. When we say, an angel of the Lord appeared to Mary. Well, that word, angelos, means messenger. Sometimes the word means exactly what you're conjuring in your mind, that spiritual being. What's that? Malach. Thank you. I had it right the first time. Should have stuck to my guns. Malach is the word for angel, and it means messenger. Sometimes when we read in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord appeared, Well, he doesn't have one angel. He has many angels. He has legions of angels, right? Some people think maybe when we read the angel of the Lord, this might be God the Son, Christ, in his, before going, before Bethlehem and all that stuff. Could be. I'm not making that case. I'm not making a case against that. It's interesting if it is. Also, that sort of teaching leads some, I believe it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, into some really strange ideas that like Jesus and Michael are the same person. That's not. That's not the same thing. Okay, Jesus is Jesus, always was, and always will be. All right. So there's 4 people walking in the fire. Let's see what happens. Then Nebuchadnezzar, near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Whose servants are they? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whose servants are they? What's that? Servants of the Most High God. Well, that's not who signs their paycheck. Remember, he's enraged because they won't do what he said. And now maybe he's learning a thing or two.
Do you think he got the terminology from Daniel?
Yes, I do. I do think he got that from Daniel.
He didn't acknowledge that there were lesser gods that he still worshiped. He just said the Most High God.
Right. Yeah. He didn't deny the existence of other gods. And paradoxically, a lot of the people of God throughout history are in the same boat. Think about the times when Israel was unfaithful. They're worshiping the other local gods. And we see how the prophets oppose them. They'll oppose them as if they were real, right? So it's probably a bit of a leap for Nebuchadnezzar to suddenly just reject the idea that any god but this one is real. But at the very least, he's starting to accept that this one is the most powerful. All right, so he says, servants of the Most High, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. All right. Worth noting, they could have come out at any moment. He doesn't order the furnace to be opened, right? That doesn't happen. Nope. They just came out. Nobody can go open it, because if they get too close, they die. So the 3 or 4, they're just taking their leisurely time in there. Maybe we'll circle back to that. Maybe we won't. Okay. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together and saw, so basically, all the people who had been invited there to do the idolatry, gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, there was no smell of fire had come upon them. So they're untouched by the flames, even their clothes. But what happened to the ropes? Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies, rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. From the perspective of somebody looking in at the theological situation, this is a pretty big turn. beginning of the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is building the biggest stinking idol he can muster, right? And who is it an image of? Is it Baal? Is it Dagon? Asherah? Who is the image, this idol that he's setting up? Himself. Yeah. I mean, in terms of wickedness, from a biblical standpoint, this is pretty deep. From a literary standpoint, this is some pretty extreme hubris. Now, I know the word hubris has kind of fallen out of fashion these days. It used to be that every important story told was, well, not every, but almost all of them, were in some way cautionary tales about the dangers of hubris. You know what hubris is? I should unpack it. Okay. So hubris is just a term that means something like the pride that leads to your own destruction. Right. So if you think about like Macbeth or Hamlet, right? If you think about Achilles, think about a lot of the classical figures who die tragically. They do so because they have an unfounded confidence in themselves, right? So this is like the perfect picture of that. He's like, I'm going to be the greatest. I am the greatest. People should literally worship an image of me. Now, for the Israelites, there's at least two big violations. Number one, he's making a graven image. And number two, they're bowing down and worshiping it. So like those are both major red flags. By the end of the chapter, so the beginning of the chapter, he's doing this and he is setting himself up as the God. By the end of the chapter, he is, what's that? Not yet. That's coming. No, but by the end of this chapter, he is himself worshiping. Now, also, it's worth thinking in the ancient world that the distinction between kings and deities was a lot fuzzier than we might have today, right? Think about the Egyptian pharaohs for a quick minute, right? They thought of themselves as being like on the spectrum toward being a deity, you know? And maybe the king himself might be an incarnation of Ra. So for this guy, it'd be like, look at all my greatness. Of course I'm a god. People would accept that, and they would worship it. So in a sense, what we have here is the pagan god bowing down to worship the true God. We have the idol bowing down to the true God. When we talk about God being the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and the God of gods, right? This is what, a picture of exactly that. He blesses God. Now, I want you to read the terms of this blessing, because it's pretty wild coming from an egomaniac. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants. We all got that part. Watch this. Who trusted in him and set aside the king's command. He's blessing God because these three men disobeyed him. Again, earlier in the chapter, that disobedience was enough to throw him into a violent rage, demanding they make a fire 7 times hotter and tossing the men ASAP. Like he's losing it because they disobeyed him, because he's not used to being disobeyed. And now he says, blessed be God, because these men had the courage to disobey me. They set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. He's starting to get the message. Okay, let's read verse 29, and then we're going to circle back and touch on a couple points, and then we'll probably wrap it up for the day. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Remember how I told you that in the ancient world, almost everybody was a polytheist, right? And he had no problem with that. He was just asking these guys to tack on one more God, right? How does the story end? What's in that decree he just made? Yeah. A little louder, man. What'd you say?
Just one.
There's just one. Just one what? Just one God. You can only worship one God. This specific God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No. Well, yes, but the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's how he sees it. Right? You can worship no other God but this God because he is the God who saves. And without looking, I'm going to trust that that guitar is okay. Because I worship the God who saves.
It's only cracked the back of it.
This is fine.
May have to tune it.
We'll see. We'll see. Maybe God will give me a miracle and I won't have to tune it. Yeah, so only the one God can be worshipped. He's essentially establishing a state religion, by the way. And his intention at the beginning was to unify everybody under the worship of himself. By the end of the chapter, he says, no. You can't worship anybody, ostensibly even this idol here. You can't worship anybody except for their God, because he is the God who saves. Now, that's an important point. He saw in their lives this personal salvation, but also remember the catalyzing event of all this from last chapter. He's thinking a lot about his kingdom and its destruction. He had a vision about it, right? Let's worship the God who saves, God who preserves. All right, I do want to circle back to this. I had a note for it and I left it, and we got time for it, so let's do it. Did the Lord need to be physically present in the fire to protect them? Did an angel or Jesus or whomever that fourth person was, did they have to be visible for God to do the thing? So that means it was a choice on God's part to have a visible Savior there for them. Who was that for? Why? Why show Nebuchadnezzar this fourth person walking in the fire? Well, because he didn't throw in for sure, yeah. Yeah, and it is an interesting literary device that it's Nebuchadnezzar who spots it, right? That tells us that, yes, it is for Nebuchadnezzar. But why?
Showing God's power.
Yeah. It's, he wants, I think this is very much about showing Nebuchadnezzar that God is real, that he's present. There's no accidents or mistakes here. And, for us, the symbolism is really powerful, right? Because we can apply this in metaphorical ways. When you're going through the fire, God's in the fire with you, He's able to protect you and save you and pull you through it. All that kind of stuff, it's beautiful for us. Did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego see it? I don't know. The only person we know that saw that fourth person is Nebuchadnezzar. And this is one of the big motifs of the beginning of Daniel, these first 4 chapters, is that the book is about Daniel. It's about his friends, but more than that, it's about God reaching out to try and, I'm just going to say it, to try and save Nebuchadnezzar from himself. This is a book about reaching out to Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.
Was he really, I'm reading that he's saying, don't
Yes?
Is that really saying you should worship this God and no other?
Maybe. Well, so you can't speak bad about their God, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. So maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe he's leaving the sort of polytheism in a good place. But at least he's establishing, that's a good point, thank you. But he's establishing a strong place of prominence for their God as the highest God. Right? What's that? Kind of like Constantine, yeah. Yeah. And particularly as an American, I've got some weird feelings about the Constantine thing. You know? Like, as soon as people start slapping crosses on their shields to go to war, to kill people in the name of Jesus, it's like, something's probably not going right here. Something went sideways here. So, but we will talk about that more later on. We're pretty much up against our time at this point. You know what? Yeah, we can do the first 3 verses of the next chapter, just because the chapter break kind of falls in a weird place. I kind of think maybe these should be in the previous chapter. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, languages that dwell in all the earth. By the way, this is also kind of a sophisticated storytelling device. We've actually changed perspectives. We're not in third person now. We're in like a first person perspective as Nebuchadnezzar. And he's like dictating a decree here. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. Get it? God has done this for me.
It's all about him.
Well, yeah, but he's not wrong in this regard, right? God has given him a dream. God has shown him a sign. God is trying to reach him in particular. And I think part of the reason why God is trying to reach him in particular is because of the place he occupies in the world. I mean, if his heart can be made right, he has power to do great good in the world. But to do that, he's going to have to humble himself. So it is sort of ironic or self-defeating that he thinks it's all about him. But it is all about him. But it's not actually about him. It's about God. Trying to get through to him. For God. You know what I mean? Anyways, here's what he says. Verse 3, and we're going to stop on this. How great are his signs, how mighty his works. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. And his dominion endures from generation to generation. That was what the dream was about. And now it clicks for him. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Earthly kings, you get one. I mean, like, you can look at, oh gosh, what was her name? The Queen, was it Elizabeth that just passed away recently? You know, she was queen for decades, but still, that reign has to pass down to a subsequent generation. You'll have your own opinions about that. But not so with the kingdom of God. Because he's eternal, his kingdom, there's no succession. He's just king forever. All right, so we will pick up Daniel chapter 4 next week. Thank you so much. We got church starting in 10 minutes and 30 seconds. So we'll see you there.